Andy Shone will be the first presenter. He's the CEO of Southpac Group, as well as being an active facilitator, a lead auditor and consultant. He has led the development of innovative training and assurance programs covering leadership, quality, safety and continual improvement, all with a focus on the critical role of people. He's a postgraduate of the Griffith University Safety Science Innovation Lab in Brisbane, Australia, and is a passionate proponent of cutting-edge leadership concepts and safety science. The next speaker will be Mark Alston. He's has extensive experience in investigations. He commenced as a federal agent in the Australian Federal Police, responsible for investigating organised crime and large-scale drug and fraud offences. Since then, Mark's worked for a diverse range of organisations, including BHP, Rio Tinto, McMahon Holdings, CQMS Razor, and Mitchell Services, with roles in incident investigations, risk management, safety, and auditing. So with that, Andy, I'll hand things over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having us onto your webinar. So, many of you may have heard the term learning teams being bandied around, and it's certainly a noticeable trend that more and more organisations, both here in Australia and overseas, are starting to engage with these ideas and methods, what we call learning teams. So learning teams are a relatively new method and approach for learning, and we mentioned here for learning about and from both events, so that's the stuff that we traditionally would investigate, so accidents, incidents, potentially near misses and stuff like that. But the other thing which is really powerful about learning teams is they're also something we can use to learn about normal work. The things that we wouldn't maybe normally pay that much attention to. We do have some tools, and we'll have a look at them in a moment, that we can use for looking at our day-to-day operations, safety observations and audits and things like that. But learning teams kind of take a different approach in a number of different ways. And it's that difference which allows us to get really rich operational learning and insight into the work which is going on in our organization. So the really critical thing here, though, and this is the but, which is there, learning teams themselves, and the reason why I guess they're so effective, is they're not that important. What's more important is the operating philosophy that underpins learning teams. You can do learning teams almost in any organization, but if the operating philosophy that sits behind it is not either understood or is not right, you will not get the same bang for your buck. You will not get the super effective learning teams that maybe some organizations are experiencing. So what do we mean by this operating philosophy? Well, we refer to that operating philosophy as HOP, or Human and Organizational Performance. You may have heard of HOP, you may have heard of safety differently, you may have heard of safety too. They're very similar operating philosophies, and you have to kind of understand and appreciate that first before doing things like learning teams. I'll explain a little bit further later on why you need to have that operating philosophy right first. Otherwise, you will have a lot of potentially unintended consequences of doing learning teams. But just as a very brief taster, these are our 5 principles of HOP. Firstly, that error is normal, or you may have seen it, that people make mistakes. So it's an acknowledgement of the fact that yes, we can train people, we can give people error prevention tools, we can try and manage the workplace in a way to make error less likely. But at the end of the day, we are still all going to be human. And part of being human is the fact that we are fallible. We make mistakes, we have slips and lapses, we forget things, we're human, and we have to accept the fact that we will make errors, and we need to build systems that allow for that. So with that in mind, we then acknowledge and accept the fact that blaming people for making errors is a pretty dumb thing to do. It really doesn't allow us to get better. It doesn't allow us to learn. It doesn't allow the system to improve if we just constantly blame the humans in the systems for making errors. So again, this is another part of being human. when things go wrong, it's a very instinctive reaction to want to blame. We all do it. So what we need to get a lot better at is internalizing that reaction, to kind of taking a breath and going, okay, I'm sure these people didn't intend this to happen. If they knew it was going to happen, they probably wouldn't have done it. And then once we are able to do that, it opens the way for us to learn a lot more about the context or the work that people were doing. So our third principle, systems or context drive behavior. So if we really want to understand why people do the things they do in work, whether it's in normal work or if it's when there's been an accident or an incident, we really need to understand the context in which they were working. Because people generally make decisions and do things that are locally rational to them. They make sense at the time. And we only really can understand that once we've reconstructed and understand the context of the that people are working in. And the scenario we'll look at in a moment will hopefully explain a little bit more of what we mean by the context that people are operating in. In order to be able to learn about the context, we need to have the environment whereby we're not interested in blame and we're acknowledging the fact that error is normal. And then that allows us to learn about our own operations, learning about how things normally go well and how they sometimes go wrong. And the final piece, and this is a really important piece we'll come to at the end, is the fact that response really, really matters. So if you want people to bring you kind of the true stories about how things are happening in the work, we have to manage our response when we hear it. We kind of lose the plot, they'll only bring it to us once. And then that bridge is broken and the information is not going to be shared. So we have to manage the way we respond to when things go wrong, but also manage our response even when things appear to be going right. When everything seems to be going well, our response, if it's one that, well, everything is probably going well, we've probably got great systems in place and everyone's following them, we could fall into a trap there too. So we have to manage our response as managers and leaders. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment as well. The reason we use that elastic band ball as well, by the way, is the fact that you'll notice those 5 different colours of the 5 principles, and they're all there intertwined within that elastic band ball. Each principle is vital, and they all there's a lot of interplay between all of them. You can't say any one is more important than the other. And many of the ideas and concepts that sit under each of those principles are very much interrelated. So that's why we kind of use that kind of metaphor, the elastic band ball. One of the concepts that sit underneath human and organizational performance, and it's probably one of the most important, if not the most important, and this is shared across all those various different terms I used before, safety 2, safety differently hot. It's all around acknowledging the fact that within every organization there is what we call a black line. Now we call that work as planned or work as imagined or work as prescribed. Every organization has this. It's policies, it's procedures, it's regulations, it's guidelines and best practices, all these types of things, oftentimes which are developed and written in an office environment, sometimes far away from where the work happens. But this is our organization's, how it believes work gets done, how it would like work to get done. Every organization in the world pretty much also has what we call a blue line. Work in practice, how the work actually it gets done. And sometimes it might be as per the book. Sometimes it might be performing above what the book says. Sometimes it's below that. But it's continually varying. And there are many, many reasons why work is continually varying, but it's generally in response to the real world. No procedure can ever allow for every possibility and every type of variability. So people adjust naturally their performance all the time, taking into consideration the context. So if you pull out your driveway this morning and there was a utility truck blocking the way because they were repairing a water main or something, you wouldn't just sit there and wait for days. you would immediately adapt or adjust your performance. You'd go a different way. And that's what makes humans generally very successful most of the time, because we adapt and we adjust and we get stuff done. What we tend to do in traditional investigations, and however, and the same in audits, when something goes wrong, when we have an event, there's this kind of little explosion sort of here shows on the slide, we come along and it's very easy for us to identify the fact that the people involved here, their blue line was some way away from the black line. We identify the gap, and sometimes we'll call out a cause and say, we've identified the cause of this particular accident or incident. We found the gap. We found the gap between what they were supposed to be doing and what they were doing, and tend to then use some kind of counterfactual reasoning. If only they'd been doing the black line, this wouldn't have happened. But of course, you can see that the blue line's there the whole time. The blue line's there, and there's variability throughout the work all the time. It's not always leading to accidents and incidents. So that kind of reasoning is flawed. So what we really are more interested in with the blue line is understanding the blue line, understanding the context and what is driving that variability, but also how far the blue line is from this red line, which is the hazards and danger in the work. How much margin of safety do we have between the blue line and the red line? And if we want to really be able to do that well and understand that, we need to speak to the people who are doing the work every day, the people who are the masters of the blue line, the people who basically live on the blue line. And we've got this quote here from Todd Conklin and Bob Edwards, and it mentions their workers are masters of complex adaptive behavior, or masters of the blue line. They do it all the time. So if we want to understand why they do the things they do and how work really happens, we really need to include them. And that's where we get to this idea of learning teams. Learning teams are our means, or one of the means we have of understanding the blue line. So if we want to understand, we want to get better answers, we have to have better or different questions that go to context as opposed to choices. When things go wrong, we can see it as people made the wrong choice, and we maybe look for a cause. But if we decide we're not so much interested in that, we're more interested in context and conditions, and we ask questions that lead to context and conditions, we tend to do a lot more learning. So it's not about necessarily 5 whys or even worse, 1 who. It's about understanding what was work looking like at the time. And that's what learning teams are very good at doing, allowing us to build out that context. So we're going to share a brief scenario with you to explain and show how the learning teams have this power. So this is a picture of a manufacturing site. This isn't the manufacturing site we're going to be talking about, but it's maybe not too dissimilar to this. This is a site which is in the UK for a large multinational company that both myself and Mark and Vanessa have been doing some work with over the last 12 months. Now, this particular site was pretty much brand new. It was only less than 12 months old, which in manufacturing terms is very new. There was a plant manager at the time when we went there and did the learning team. Had only been in post for about a month. The previous site manager had been relieved of that particular position. So you think, well, everything should be great. This is a brand new site. The site, however, had been underperforming its design capacity for some time, pretty much since it had been opened. And they had some concerns about, particularly around certain parts of the line. They had concerns particularly around the infeed of this line. This is where the raw product comes in and then goes onto the line. And they were also had some concerns around adherence to the company's global cardinal rules. There was concern that there may be behaviors going on which may be contravening some of those rules. So we were asked to do a learning team in this site to set a little bit more of the context. Fortunately, the site manager and some other people at that site had just done 3 days of training on human and organizational performance and learning teams. So they were kind of ready for us to do this learning team. Now, if we'd gone in there and done a traditional sort of approach, which may have involved doing either an audit or some form of safety observations, I can guarantee the things that we would have found. And I'm not kind of casting aspersions on anyone here. I've done these things too. My background has been a lot in aviation safety over the last 10 years. And we used to regularly audit a operator at Melbourne Airport. And one of their managers used to say when we were doing ramp audits, don't go down to the ramp, like the picture on the right-hand side here is, and speak to the people and observance. Just stand at the gate, particularly gate 34, because you've got a really good view of the whole ramp, and don't even let them know you're there. Just observe and watch and see what they're doing. I always find some really interesting stuff doing that. And of course, that's true. You can stand at gate 34, stood up bird's eye view watching, and you might find all the places where the procedures aren't being followed, potentially where the guy isn't wearing a seatbelt when he's driving the GSE. And you can find all these non-conformances or non-compliances. But all we're identifying by doing that is we're identifying where they're not matching the black line. We're observing the blue line without really getting any understanding at all of why they're doing all those things. Are these just reckless risk takers and people who just don't want to comply, or whatever it might be, or are there other reasons why they're doing it? So if we'd taken that kind of traditional approach at this particular site back in the UK, here's what we probably would have found. We would have found manual handling risk, the fact that those particular standards and procedures weren't being adhered to, rules were being broken. Yeah, if we'd been sneaky enough, we would have found that even cardinal rules were being broken. And this is an organization which traditionally has been very punitive around its cardinal rules, i.e. get caught breaking a cardinal rule and you can be either suspended or fired. So we would have found that, and we would have found also maintenance not being completed. If we'd gone through and done the auditing on that particular element, we would have found that, yeah, okay, once again, the black line is not being adhered to. So all we would have been doing there is identifying all the symptoms. However, we did a learning team, as I've already alluded to. So what is a learning team and what did it find? So a learning team, rather than either necessarily observing or auditing people, we get people from the front line into a room and we sit down with them and we have a conversation. As it mentions here, a learning team tells a story, and it can either be on an event, or in this case, as we were doing in the UK, it was on normal work. And it was how this group of people, these frontline workers, how they experience and see work. And it helps us to understand the complexity and normal variability of work and of how work really gets done. Not how we think it gets done from the black line procedures and policies which we'd looked up, the cardinal rules and so on, but how they actually really get work done. And critically, why the things they do make sense. A learning team is not a traditional investigation. It's not worried about collusion. We don't want to set each person down separately and ask them these questions. We get them together as a group, and it goes down as a conversation. And as a consequence, there may be disagreement, but we're not really that interested in everyone being completely in agreement. We're trying to get the various different perspectives and all the different kind of thought processes from the different people in the room. Because we're not concerned about one root cause or one issue, it allows the conversation to flow and go in all types of different directions, which allows for really rich learning. And because, of course, we're not focused on blame, we're trying to create a safe environment where people can feel free to talk about their experience of work and of the blue line. We get that real deep intelligence and understanding. So who's on a learning team? Well, in this case, this one we did in the UK, it was myself as the facilitator, and Mark, who will be talking later, was there as well. We had, unusually in this case, 3 safety professionals from the organization who were sitting in, which we were very concerned about because we weren't sure how it was going to go, having all these safety people from the organization sitting in. But they just kind of sat in and sat in the back and didn't really say a great deal. They were just observing. And then we had 3 or 4 guys who worked on the line. there was a forklift driver, and there was a maintenance guy. So there was enough people there to get a rounded view of how work happens at this particular site. They were the ones who were close to the event or to the issue. Leadership of the site were not involved, aside from coming in and welcoming everybody, telling them that they're joining for the debrief afterwards, that essentially they had top cover, if they could feel free to discuss anything they wanted, and it would be dealt with in a sensible and mature way. There was not going to be any kind of blame or punishment. They really wanted to, they were a new plant manager, and they really wanted to understand some of the issues in the plant. So that was who was on the learning team. The goal of the learning team, or of any learning team, this is a quote from Bob Edwards. He mentions that the goal is to learn enough that we realize, given the conditions that people face, the information they hold, the tools and equipment they have, and the pressure that they are under, we would probably make the same decision, or would be making the same decisions, or behaving in a similar sort of way. We're trying to get inside their world. It involves us being empathetic and wanting to get inside someone else, try and get in someone else's shoes and see the world how they see it. So this is something very brief on the learning team process. I'm not going to really talk through this too much. So you'll have access to this afterwards, I believe. But once we've got that group of people together, our first session, which in this instance went for about an hour and a half, was what we call in just learning mode only. All we're doing is asking broad and open questions and trying to build an understanding of what life is like, particularly around this part of the production facility, around the in-feed and a production line, and try and build an understanding for what it's like to work there. We then take a break, which we call soak time. Ideally, that's overnight, but in this instance, we couldn't do that overnight, so we did that over lunch. And then we used to do a second session, get them back into the room again. We start in learning mode, reviewing the information, and then we start to talk about solutions. So here it says define defenses or build new ones or improve. Well, at this point in time, we're talking about what could we do better? What could be changed to improve the work? And that's where we got to with this particular learning team. So we're trying to understand some of the problems in the context, and we really have to be very disciplined in that first session. People will instinctively want to start fixing. People, humans especially, we have a bias to action and doing stuff, getting stuff done, getting things fixed up. So anytime people start straying towards a solution, we have to kind of say, that's a really great idea, but maybe just hold on to that, because at the moment we're still trying to understand all of the various different aspects of the context around the work. So by being very disciplined and just focused on that, it just allows us to keep on filling up a big whiteboard or a flip board or whatever you're using, and really building out all this information. We don't want to start fixing anything yet, because we haven't really fully understood the context. And even any one individual in the room might not have the full understanding. But by the team discussing this, we get all those kind of different perspectives, and we build a really good picture of some of the influences and pressures that are shaping the way the work is being done. So as we mentioned, we're about focusing on conditions and not choices. When we start focusing on choices and decisions people make, it's putting it all on the individuals and the human. Whereas we focus on the conditions, we're seeing the broader whole system and the influences of those decisions and choices people are making. We're inviting dissent and diversity. We're not looking for them all to be in agreement on everything. Now, in most learning teams, they'll tend to find there's certain key themes which everyone's in agreement on, but there will still be dissent and some disagreement on other things. We're not obviously constructing timelines. We're not taking witness statements, writing down who said what. We're just trying to build the understanding. And we also absolutely withhold judgment, because what happens inevitably is about half an hour into that first session, people really start to realize that anything can, they can say anything and there's not going to be any consequences. And they'll start telling you about the times they break the cardinal rules, the times they break the rules and why they do it. And if we react badly to that, that's going to shut down the conversation. So we have to kind of be open to that, hear it, and hear it without judgment. So what we found in that first session with this group, and they've just kind of summarized this here because there was a lot of stuff that came out. There always is a lot of stuff. You can fill pages and pages of information. But these are some of the key themes that came out of this learning team. So first up was production pressure. And that's not going to be a surprise to anybody because any site, any manufacturing site, there's always production pressure. But this is a new site, don't forget. So this is a new site and it's been built or designed with a set capacity or output. This site from day one underperformed against that design capacity. Now, outside of this site, no one had really ever stopped and asked the question, why is the site not performing to its design capacity? And rather was forever just putting more pressure on the site. This is a brand new site. You should be performing at this level. This is the level it was designed to perform at. So as a consequence, there was this kind of psychology within the whole site that they were forever playing catch up. There was never time for anything other than keeping the line running. Now, there was a lot of reasons why this was underperforming. From the day it had been commissioned, there was issues that had never really been ironed out from when it was initially commissioned, but they never got around to it. But then this kind of the fact that they were behind then meant there wasn't really the time to square, revert back and square out these things that hadn't been fixed. That kind of leads into the second theme here about maintenance was not being completed. There was no preventative maintenance at all happening. The maintenance team were understaffed, and the maintenance guy who was on our learning team was actually on his notice period and was leaving. He'd had enough. And to top that off, the maintenance team had very restricted access to the line. That relates back to the previous theme, production pressure, don't stop the line. We have to try and make up the gap we've already got now in terms of outcomes and output. So no one wants to stop the line to do any maintenance, which in turn then creates further pressure when things start to go wrong. There were in fact really very minor things that the maintenance guys had said, if we could have 10 minutes on the line or 15 minutes on the line, some of these things we could iron out, and that would have massive benefits long term. But no one shift wanted to take the hit on their shift. No, we can't stop the line for 15 minutes, do it on night shift. The night shift, of course, would say, well, we don't do it on our shift, do it on early shift. And these problems just never got fixed. The next key theme was the insufficient or wrong equipment. So there was a section of the line where they had a lot of blockages. Now this line was higher than the line shown here in this picture. Now because the line was at a certain height and they had blockages, they also had no elevated platform alongside. So they had really very little way of clearing these blockages aside from climbing onto the line and forcibly clearing the blockage and allowing the system to run again. Now, that was a cardinal rule for the organization. No climbing on plant and equipment. That's an instant dismissal offense. But they were telling us, well, we're doing that because we've got no other way of getting the job done and even getting close to achieving the required output. If we were to both isolate and stop the line and get the right equipment to get up there, we'd even be even further behind with the numbers. So numbers, they understand the numbers are important. So they're putting themselves at risk to try and help the site get the output. They also had isolation fences that were oftentimes in the wrong place, and particularly around the infeed. If they had a pile of product fall over, they had no way of getting a forklift in there to help remove the product. So they were having to do it all by hand, which then took a lot longer. So as I said, a huge amount of information came out. And even with 3 of the organization's safety professionals in the room, within half an hour or 45 minutes, they told us about the rules and cardinal rules that they were breaking. But of course, we withheld all judgment and thanked them for the information they were providing. And once we understood the context that they were working in, it was no surprise at all that they were breaking these rules because they felt they had no choice. They had to do this to be able to try and help the plant get the numbers. So rather than kind of the audit or the safety observation, which yes, absolutely would identify the symptoms, i.e. the violations, the rule breaking, the maintenance not being done, by doing a learning team, we start to build out what we call a messy story. all of the other context that sits around the work, and then explains why people do the things that they do. And learning teams are excellent at helping us to really build out that context. So yes, we had a little bit of soak time to allow people to think about what we just discussed. And then we had a second session where we reviewed all that information, the key things, and we started to talk about some of the solutions they had. And of course, these are people who do the work every day. They work in that plant and they know it better than anybody. So they had so many ideas around what things that could be changed. And then the safety professionals who were sitting in, who rotate all over the country, going to all different plants, they were able then to provide a little bit of guidance around what things are possible and what are already in place in other sites. So they were able to come up with some really great ideas, some of which, once the site manager was briefed on, was like, well, some of these things could be done very quickly indeed and wouldn't cost a lot of money either. There were some things they were like, we're going to have to put in some money, for CapEx on a couple of items. But other things they felt they were able to action really very quickly. So the kind of what learning teams provide us with, what we call as essentially operational wisdom. Like we mentioned there, it's the difference between fixing the right things first time or fixing the wrong things aggressively and often. Now, what that organization has done globally for a long time is fix the wrong things aggressively and often. Every time they've found people breaking the rules, they've just fired the people breaking the rules. But now, by starting with this approach with HOP and they're doing learning teams, they're starting to understand the context, and they're starting to then fix the context rather than trying to fix the humans. And that's been having dramatic impacts for them and for other organizations that are doing this too. Now, the key thing to say with the learning team is, yes, there are outcomes from the learning team, and some of them are tangible. So that's the learning and the insights we gain that might get put together into a report, and absolutely essentially the corrective actions and improvements. Because if we don't do anything with the insight we gain and the ideas and solutions people come up with, we might as well not do it, because it'll do more harm than good. People say, oh, we sat down, we told them all this stuff and they did nothing. But when stuff does get done, when action is taken, the intangible outcomes are probably even more powerful than the tangible ones in terms of the sharing of a story. Hey, we were involved in this learning team. We shared all these ideas. We told them all the stuff that was going on. A, no one got in trouble. And B, we actually were listened to and changes were made. And that really starts to change the narrative in the organization. It helps to build engagement and to build trust. And the guys who walked out of that learning team, the 5 or 6 frontline guys who have been on that learning team from that site back in the UK, they visibly walked out kind of, 7 or 8 feet tall. They were engaged, they were excited. And the safety professionals had sat and observed it. They were still talking about it a whole week later when we were doing another session with them in a different place. They were so excited about what they'd seen and so enthused with it. So, that's the power that they can achieve. The things to think about: you've got to be very careful about where you do these learning teams. You've got to think about who you're going to involve, who the facilitator is going to be. You can't do them for everything, so you're going to have to be mindful of the fact that you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. Generally, don't use learning teams in the first instance on accidents or incidents. It's better to go and focus on maybe a problem process, or maybe some high risk work, which you may think is worth doing some learning on. Anywhere where there's not already some negative outcome, which may be going to drive undesirable behaviors and people not wanting to share for fear. So, but start to build some confidence and capacity with the ideas of a learning team. And then down the track, you might want to start doing other things with learning teams too. The absolute critical thing, though, with learning teams, as I said before, if you do a learning team but haven't prepared the soil, you haven't got the leadership on side, you're going to get potentially in some real strife. And we've seen this in a few organizations we work with, where they've been very fired up, very excited, gone off and done learning teams. And when the information has been presented back to the leadership, either site leadership or plant leadership, they've lost the plot. What do you mean people are breaking cardinal rules? Everyone knows that's totally unacceptable. Everyone knows that's instant dismissal. So if people can't handle the truth, if they're not ready for the blue line conversation, it's not a good time or a good place to start doing learning teams. So that's why it's really important to have that kind of the ground prepared, leadership ready. And in the case of this one, the learning team we did in the UK, that manager had actually already done some Hotman learning team training, and he handled it absolutely beautifully. It was engaged. When he actually came in for the debrief, he'd actually bought a bag full of fish and chips for everybody and cans of Coke, and we kind of had a very informal debrief, and he was very receptive to the ideas and said, let's get this stuff done. So the philosophy is really important. The tool is great, but the philosophy and the thinking's got to be right too. Otherwise, you just will not get that kind of real amazing long-term effective solutions that learning teams can deliver. So that's the kind of really the key thing we'd say. Yeah, the method is great, but get the thinking right first and prepare the soil before you start kind of uncovering this incredible insight. That's what I've got to deliver. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand over to Mark, who's going to show how this kind of relates then back to the myosh system.
Mark, I might just in case you've muted yourself.
Sorry about that, everyone. I did mute myself. Thank you to everyone for joining us this morning, and I hope everyone's working well if you're in isolation and looking after yourselves and your teammates. I just want to second what Andy said about the learning team we did there in London. It was just excellent. Just the amount of truth that came out of it was astounding, and the comfort level of the people involved in talking about their work honestly and the challenges and the issues that they had was just mind-blowing. So thank you very much. So my bit in this little presentation is going to talk about the myosh software and the new learning teams module that we've developed that I've had a small hand in developing with myosh. So basically, if you haven't used myosh before, or if you haven't, it's a great health and safety environment quality database management system. It has training capabilities, has hazards inspections, incident reporting, and all that sort of stuff in there. Several of my clients use it and love it, and it works well for them. So one of the things we noticed going in this path, the popularity of learning teams has meant that we needed somewhere to record it. So one of the issues our clients have when we're running learning team training with Southpac is they need that place where they can actually, that database, that repository of where they can put learning teams. So this here you'll see on your screens now is it's just the home screen for myosh, and you'll see on the left hand side there all the different modules. Now they've got a heap of those modules. If you're interested in learning more, just go to myosh.com and you'll be able to have a look at that. So you look on the left hand side and there's our learning team module. So we click on that, and basically what we're going to do is Andy gave us that great example of the learning team that we did in London. And I just want to show you how easy it is to put that data into the myosh learning teams module. So basically we click on new record and up it comes, and basically we just simply follow the prompt. It's fairly simple. So who was in the learning team itself, who the facilitator was. So I'll make it myself today. The scribe, Tim was the scribe, and the sponsoring manager. Now that's the manager that's going to be responsible for sponsoring the learning team. And Andy talked about the manager we had in that production line over in London was fantastic. And so we'll put them in there. And then basically it's pretty simple. The date, so we can put today's date, the process task. So this is bespoke, this bit. So any organisation within the system of myosh can actually adjust this itself, this list of drop-down menu items. So in this case, we'll put infield. And then what the topic was about. So in this case, it was about improving efficiency and productivity for the in-feed line. So it's as simple as that. Of some typing I've done earlier. Bit of background on it. So it just gives a little bit more of information. We can throw that in there as well again. So if we had some stakeholders that we wanted to be aware of what's going on, we can add those people in so that they're aware of what's happening, and they'll get emailed and notified about this learning team, what's going on. And then it's as simple as going through and identifying. So part of the process Andy talked about was these key themes that we identified. So we knew one of the key themes was equipment and fencing. So we just put that in as a key theme title, and then some details, and then about what was happening with that. And as you can see, we can put in a whole heap of details there. And then if there was any recommendations, we just put those in. So the recommendations of what the team recommend we should do doesn't necessarily mean what the manager will agree to do, whether it's a key theme or not, because sometimes there's other themes coming out. And then we can add some recommendations for theme 2. So there might have been a second theme, it might have been around maintenance, and we can go in and so forth. We go down the bottom, so we can say there's no key theme, no theme 3, and we can actually put a new action in if we want to. So we can, so if there's an action there for a supervisor to review the learning team, we can put that in as well. So it's quite simple to do, and it links back to the learning team that we've just done. So I'll just finish this off so we can put it in, and hopefully that will work for me. So there's our action there. So Angela's got to review this thing. If we can put attachments in here, you can see, so if we took photos, so quite often one of the ways we scribe through a learning teams is on butcher's paper or large post-it notes on a board or whoever. We take photos of those and we can just drag and drop those in there for everyone to do. And then it's simple as saving it. And that's done. So the whole idea, and then we submit and off it goes. And that'll go through to the Angela, who was the manager in this case, improving efficiency and productivity line. And that's there for everyone to see. So your organisation, provided everyone has access through their user control in myosh, they'll be able to go in here and they'll be able to see, oh, hang on. So the Geraldine site's done all this work on improving efficiency on the in-feed. Let's have a look and see if there's anything that we can get from there. And then there's action tracking linked to it, so we can always see what's going on. So that's basically the Learning Teams module. We've tried to keep it really simple and decluttered in line with safety 2 and safety differently, and reduction in unnecessary clutter in that safety space. So that's what it's about. I hope that it's a nice clean one. You can change it if you bring myosh on board, and there is room to make that more bespoke for your organisation. That's one of the advantages of myosh. And that's about all for me for this one. So thank you very much. I'll hand you back.
Great, thank you, Mark. We don't have any questions at the moment, which means you did a really good job. And Mark, you have very impressive typing skills too, I must say. So I have dropped a link in the chat panel with a link to the module page at myosh. We will put a short video on there too. We'll send an email out with some contact details for Andy and for Mark in a little while, and also a video and recording of the podcast and the slides as well. So it doesn't look like there are any questions, so we won't hang around. We've all got other work to do, but I really appreciate your time, Andy, today. That was absolutely fantastic. And also to you, Mark, once again, another great informative webinar. So thank you, everybody. Have you got anything to say, Mark or Andy?
There was just one question that's popped up here on the chat feed from Roya.
Yep. Can you link the actions items to risk? Yet there is a risk management module in myosh, and it can be linked to, all the modules can be linked.
Okay. That normally happens that we do get questions filtering in, but there doesn't seem to be any more. So
no, there's more popping up now.
Oh, they're coming in the chat.
They're coming in the chat.
Okay. All right. Well, you guys can see them. Do you want to read them, or do you want me to read them out?
So Roy has asked here, it's been said a learning team can't face the truth. How can you make it ready for it? So I assume you're referring to leadership. How do we make leadership ready for the truth? I think the key thing is to talk through them, through the 5 principles, and particularly that work as imagined versus work as done. That's a really important thing, the black line, blue line conversation, and get people to think about it from their own work experience. Like, it's all very well in believing that everyone in the front line operates to the black line, but if they think about their own work experience, they'll know that there are times when they adapt and adjust. A great example I like to use this, which is really very simple. You say, how many countries have unions that use work to rule as a form of industrial action? Well, lots do, particularly France. They use work to rule as a form of industrial action. If work to rule, the rules perfectly described work and the procedures were all perfectly matched to work, work to rule wouldn't matter. It wouldn't have any impact at all. But of course, when work to rule is implemented, productivity goes through the floor, because the workforce deliberately stop adapting and stop adjusting their performance and rigidly follow the rules, and performance drops dramatically. So the key thing is to get them ready to hear the fact that the blue line does exist in our organization, and we can choose to learn about it, or we can choose to ignore it, but we ignore it at our peril. So it's better to understand and to know, and then we can do something about it rather than live in blissful ignorance and believe in the black line.
Okay, there's some other questions coming in. Will Bob, I don't know who he is, be coming back out to Australia later in the year for HOP training?
We have nothing confirmed yet, given all of the kind of craziness that's happening at the moment. But we are hoping to have something towards the end of the year, yes.
Okay. So have you used Teams in primary industries or construction industry?
I've certainly used it in construction. I haven't done anything in primary industries, but I'm sure other people have. Not?
Yeah, so I know, certain utilities companies using Teams quite well. And I know a couple of schools are using Teams, Microsoft Teams. I assume talking about Microsoft Teams, they're using them quite well as well.
Mike asked, what is the best source of further information on the HOP process?
So as the biased CEO of Southpac Group, I'm obviously going to say that further information would be to come to the Southpac International website, southpacinternational.com, and check out some information we've got there. But also that there's a whole section on our website called the HOP Lab, which is a whole heap of free information and videos and articles, which is all shared about HOP generally, and also about learning teams. So that's southpacinternational.com, and then go to the kind of the elastic band ball on the menu, and that'll take you to the HOP Lab.
All right, we'll include those links on the email too.
There's a question there from Michael on the chat.
Okay. Michael asks, can you use learning teams on a daily basis on a smaller scale within work groups, and how would you approach this?
I might take this one if you like, Andy. you got to be careful. Like as Andy said, learning teams are quite resource heavy. Like you know, it can take to get real depth meaning out of it. So you need to pull people out of production for some time for half a day or a day. But in terms of the objectives of learning teams and getting honest answers, that comes down to those, as Andy said, tilling that soil first and implementing that hop culture, the hop ethos, so that people feel comfortable talking to you, and then getting better questions. So generative questions that understand, and leaders should be doing that on a daily basis. Line management should be doing that on a daily basis, asking generative questions that generate people to tell them stories. And if you have a no blame culture, if you have you recognise there is knowing, you're really trying to learn, that'll happen every day. A pre-start meeting, be it just in your general field interactions, whatever you call them, safety observations. If you use that generative question, you need to understand. So you're there to learn, not to teach. You'll actually start to get more information fed to you on a daily basis. With each interaction, is an opportunity to get that to learn if that's how you treat it. So generative questioning is the key there on a daily basis. Learning teams can be quite resource heavy, so you've got to be careful you don't overuse them, otherwise you halt production too much.
Just one thing to add to that in terms of the teams themselves can develop and put some of these kind of ideas about blue line conversation and operational learning questions into their daily activities in terms of like pre-starts or discussions, briefs and debriefs in terms of talking about what went well, what surprised us, what didn't go as well as planned, what went better than planned, and what can we do about some of those things. So it's not just about the learning teams, but how do you develop learning into other day-to-day activities. So that's where you can certainly get some bang for buck there.
Okay, we have a question from Ryan. Do you think that learning teams can be implemented without adopting the other HOP principles?
I think it's very, very hard to do it without adopting the HOP principles or something similar. Because without that being in place, where's the incentive for people, whoever they are, frontline workers, whoever, to share their accounts and stories of the blue line? If you're worried about, well, the organization is probably going to write me up, or worse, as soon as I start telling them, it's going to be very difficult. You're on very difficult grounds then to get people to really open up and talk about these things. So I would say it's quite difficult to do it without something like that.
Okay, all right. Well, if anyone does have more questions, they can obviously email Andy or Mark as well. So with that, thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it today. And thanks for everyone for coming.
No, thanks everyone for coming and listening to us. Cheers.
Okay, bye everyone. Have a great day.